As the hot-tempered Sergeant Carter on Gomer Pyle, U.S.M.C., Frank Sutton spent years screaming at Jim Nabors' lovable, bumbling character. But behind the scenes of the hit 1960s sitcom, whispers of a massive, bitter feud between the two co-stars have fueled Hollywood rumors for decades. Now, Frank Sutton's own final words on the matter have been uncovered, exposing the shocking reality of what really happened when the cameras stopped rolling. Was their legendary on-screen tension actually fueled by a dark real-life hatred? The very first thing that made Gomer Pyle, U.S.M.C. so unforgettable wasn't the military setting or even the laugh-out-loud comedy. It was the constant battle of personalities. Week after week, audiences watched the sweet, innocent Gomer Pyle stumble into one misunderstanding after another, while his hot-tempered drill instructor, Sergeant Vince Carter, seemed perpetually on the verge of exploding. Their arguments felt so convincing that before long, many viewers began wondering whether there was more truth behind those fiery exchanges than anyone was willing to admit. But before separating rumor from reality, it's important to understand how this unlikely television partnership became one of the biggest success stories of the 1960s. Ironically, none of it was supposed to happen. When Jim Nabors first appeared as Gomer Pyle on The Andy Griffith Show, he wasn't being introduced as television's next breakout star. The character had only been written for a single appearance. Gomer was a simple gas station attendant from Mayberry with an unmistakable country charm, an innocent outlook on life, and catchphrases that audiences immediately embraced. What nobody expected was the overwhelming reaction from viewers. Instead of fading into the background after one episode, Gomer quickly became one of the most beloved characters on television. Rather than letting the character remain in Mayberry, the network made the decision to send him somewhere no one expected, a United States Marine Corps training camp. That single decision changed television history. In May 1964, audiences watched Gomer leave the familiar streets of Mayberry behind as he reported for Marine training. The episode served as a bridge between two shows, quietly setting the stage for what would become Gomer Pyle, U.S.M.C., which officially premiered later that year on CBS. The premise sounded almost too simple to become a hit. What happens when one of the kindest, most trusting men imaginable is dropped into one of the strictest environments in America? The answer turned out to be comedy gold. Standing directly in Gomer's path was Gunnery Sergeant Vince Carter, played by Frank Sutton. Loud, demanding, impatient, and completely unprepared for a recruit like Gomer, Carter seemed determined to mold him into the perfect Marine. Gomer, meanwhile, never intentionally caused trouble. His mistakes came from genuine innocence, which somehow made them even more frustrating for his superior. As the series found its rhythm, Sergeant Carter evolved from little more than an angry drill instructor into something audiences didn't necessarily expect. Beneath his booming voice and constant frustration was someone who gradually became protective of Gomer. The relationship shifted from one built entirely on discipline to one that resembled an unlikely friendship, and at times even a father and son bond. It was that emotional evolution more than the comedy itself that kept viewers invested season after season. Frank Sutton later admitted that Carter wasn't carefully mapped out from the beginning. He largely built the character by instinct, allowing him to grow naturally as the series progressed. Together, Sutton and Nabors created a chemistry that couldn't be manufactured. While Gomer Pyle, U.S.M.C. was set within the Marine Corps and aired during the height of the Vietnam War, the series deliberately avoided discussing the conflict itself. Instead, it focused on timeless stories about friendship, kindness, and the simple belief that decency could overcome almost anything. That approach resonated with millions of viewers. The series became one of CBS's biggest successes, consistently ranking among the 10 most watched programs in the country throughout its 5-season run. By the time the show concluded in 1969, after 150 episodes, it finished as the second highest-rated television series in America, trailing only Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In. Behind the scenes, the production enjoyed extraordinary support from the United States Marine Corps itself. Much of the series was filmed at Camp Pendleton and other California locations, with military officials providing extensive cooperation because they believed the program reflected positively on the Marines. Eventually, however, even the biggest Hits reach a crossroads. Approaching 40 years old, Nabors began feeling that he had taken Gomer Pyle as far as he could. Rather than continue playing the same character indefinitely, he decided it was time to pursue new opportunities. Nabors chose to end the show after 5 seasons and move on to the Jim Nabors Hour, a variety program that showcased not only his comedic talent, but also his remarkable singing voice. Interestingly, one familiar face came along for the ride. Frank Sutton continued working alongside Nabors on the new series, appearing in comedy sketches alongside him and fellow Gomer Pyle co-star Ronnie Shell. For anyone looking only at their professional choices, it hardly looked like the behavior of two men who couldn't stand each other. And yet, that didn't stop the rumors. The more iconic their performances became, the more people blurred the line between fiction and reality. Long before millions of television viewers knew him as the red-faced drill instructor, Frank Sutton had already lived a life far more remarkable than most people realized. Sutton was born in Clarksville, Tennessee. When he was just 9 years old, he stepped into his very first acting role, and the experience stayed with him forever. Years later, Sutton recalled that the instant he walked onto the stage, he felt something he had never experienced before. Right then and there, he knew exactly what he wanted to do with his life. After graduating in 1941, Sutton found work as a radio announcer. But with World War II underway, he wanted to serve. His first choice was the United States Marine Corps. There was just one problem. Despite his determination, Sutton was rejected because he was colorblind. Instead, he enlisted in the United States Army. Serving in the South Pacific, Sutton participated in 14 assault landings during the war. By the time his military service ended in 1946, he had earned the rank of sergeant before receiving an honorable discharge. It's a remarkable twist of fate that years later, the actor who couldn't become a Marine because of his eyesight would become one of the most recognizable Marines in television history. After the war, Sutton returned to acting with even greater determination. He enrolled at Columbia University, studying drama while refining the talent he had first discovered as a child. He graduated with honors in 1952. Throughout the 1950s and early 1960s, Sutton became one of those dependable character actors whose face audiences recognized even if they couldn't always remember his name. He appeared in a long list of television dramas, including Route 66, The Twilight Zone, The Fugitive, Gunsmoke, and The Untouchables. He landed supporting roles in films, including the Academy Award-winning Marty. The work kept coming, but true stardom always seemed just out of reach. Then everything changed with one role. When producers cast Sutton as the fiery gunnery Sergeant Vince Carter, they were pairing a serious dramatic actor with Jim Nabors' lovable country innocent. On paper, it seemed like an unusual combination. In reality, it was television magic. Ironically, after spending years building a career in dramatic roles, it was comedy that finally made him a household name. Away from the cameras, Sutton enjoyed a stable family life. He married soap opera writer Toby Igler in 1946, and together they raised 2 children, Joe and Amanda. Those who knew Sutton personally described a man who loved performing and never lost his appreciation for the career he had worked so hard to build. Sadly, that career would end far sooner than anyone expected. On June 28, 1974, while preparing to perform in the comedy play Love at the Beverly Barn Dinner Playhouse in Shreveport, Louisiana, Frank Sutton suffered a fatal heart attack. He was only 50 years old. His sudden passing shocked friends, colleagues, and fans alike. Before Frank Sutton passed away, he reflected on his years making Gomer Pyle, U.S.M.C. And what he shared painted a picture completely different from the one fans had believed for years. By then, rumors of a bitter feud between him and Jim Nabors had taken on a life of their own. Their arguments looked too convincing. The frustration felt too genuine. But as Sutton looked back on those years, it became clear that there really had been a battle behind the scenes. The surprising part was that it wasn't the battle anyone expected. By the late 1960s, Gomer Pyle, U.S.M.C. was still one of the biggest shows on television. Most people assumed it would continue for several more seasons. Instead, Jim Nabors began feeling the pull toward another dream. He had an extraordinary singing voice and wanted the chance to build a variety show that would allow him to combine music, comedy, and guest performances into something completely different. CBS wasn't thrilled with the idea. Walking away from one of the highest-rated comedies on television seemed almost impossible to understand. But there was one conversation that mattered more than all the meetings with network executives. Frank Sutton had spent 5 years shouting at Gomer as Sergeant Carter. And according to Sutton himself, he also felt it was time for a new challenge. Rather than trying to persuade Nabors to remain on Gomer Pyle, he encouraged him to move forward. Nabors promised there would be a place for him on the new show, and Sutton didn't hesitate to come along. If Sutton had truly disliked working alongside Nabors, it would have been the perfect opportunity to walk away for good. Instead, he chose to continue working with him. A few months later, the Jim Nabors Hour premiered on CBS. At first, everything seemed to be working. The ratings were solid. Audiences embraced the new format. But behind the scenes, another problem was beginning to grow. CBS executives couldn't stop comparing the show to Gomer Pyle. Respectable wasn't enough. They wanted another runaway success. Their solution was to feature more celebrity guests and focus more heavily on Nabors' musical talent. The comedy sketches, and especially Sutton's role in them, became less important in their eyes. Before long, the requests became impossible to misunderstand. CBS wanted Frank Sutton removed from the show altogether. For Nabors, that wasn't simply another production decision. It was personal. Sutton had supported him when walking away from Gomer Pyle meant leaving one of television's biggest successes behind. He had trusted his friend enough to take the risk and start over. Now that same friend was being treated as expendable. Nabors refused. Rather than fire Frank Sutton, he stood by him. It was a decision that carried enormous consequences. Despite maintaining respectable ratings, the Jim Nabors Hour was canceled. The cancellation became part of a much bigger shift taking place across CBS. Television would later remember that period as the Rural Purge. In an effort to appeal to younger, more urban audiences, CBS began canceling a long list of successful programs associated with small-town America. Mayberry RFD, Green Acres, Petticoat Junction, the Beverly Hillbillies, and the Jim Nabors Hour all disappeared during the same sweeping overhaul. This corporate-driven creative upheaval resonates with today's streaming landscape, where platforms like Max and Paramount Plus have similarly purged beloved series purely for balance sheet reasons, sparking the same kind of fan outrage that greeted the Rural Purge 5 decades ago. Looking back, it's difficult not to notice the irony. For decades, fans searched for evidence that Frank Sutton and Jim Nabors secretly couldn't stand each other. Yet the greatest conflict either man faced wasn't with his co-star at all. It was with the network that no longer believed their partnership belonged on television. Sutton rarely pretended his career had followed the path he originally imagined. Before Gomer Pyle, he had built a reputation playing hardened criminals and dangerous villains. During a 1969 interview, he joked that the closest he had come to comedy before landing Sergeant Carter was being strapped into an electric chair or getting shot by the FBI in dramatic roles. He laughed at the irony that while comedians desperately wanted dramatic parts, he had spent years chasing drama only to become famous as a comic actor. Even then, comedy wasn't something he simply improvised. Sutton believed in preparation. He memorized every line, carefully studied his timing, and rehearsed relentlessly until every scene felt natural. On June 28, 1974, while preparing to perform in Love at the Beverly Barn Dinner Playhouse in Shreveport, Louisiana, Frank Sutton suffered a fatal heart attack. He was with his wife Toby and daughter Amanda during rehearsals. He died doing exactly what he loved most. Years earlier, Sutton had said that the very first time he stepped onto a stage, he knew acting was where he belonged. That passion never left him. Neither did the loyalty that defined so many of his relationships. And perhaps that's the biggest surprise of all. The feud that fans spent decades believing existed wasn't between Frank Sutton and Jim Nabors. The real battle happened behind the scenes, where standing by a friend ultimately came at a price neither of them ever expected. What Gomer Pyle episode is your favorite till this very day? Share your thoughts with us in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Also, click the next video shown on your screen. You will enjoy it.